Okay. You can start again, Shivanga.
The cycle of creative competence. The parents of the magical child lead him or her into the possibilities of the world by example. At 7, she or he is open to suggestion, able to construct the abstractions needed for moving into the world according to ideas about the world, and able to operate on world information and change that information according to idea.
So over here, it's important the first line, okay? The parent of the magical child leads him, her into the possibility of the world by example. So the parent leads by example.
To the child, the parents are playing with him or her, joining in his or her reality. To the parent, the child is playing with them, joining them in ever deeper play with the principles of mind. The child is fascinated with the world and becomes analytic. She or he wants to take the world apart and see what makes it tick. And she or he will, in the coming years, take apart the clock, a watch, the electric mixer, the sewing machine, or whatever is available. This too is learning, and the parents make available things for the youngster to operate on, not just educational toys, but things of the real adult world.
See, now this is important. You have to allow the child to investigate. ये मत करो, वो मत करो, ऐसे मत करो. That creates a huge problem for the children.
They allow the child to bumble through projects, helping only if asked. They have patience when she or he takes apart but cannot reassemble, which is often the case. They know that his or her logic is not yet reversible, that she or he will follow the impulse for taking apart, but will have difficulty reversing his or her steps and remembering how to put together again. Doing things is the order of the child's day. She or he thinks by doing. She or he cannot extricate him or herself from body actions and observe them. The parents do not restrain body action in favor of some arbitrary head action appropriate only to later stages because they know that at this stage body restriction is intellectual restriction. Through creative modeling, they furnish the youngster with the principles of mind needed for moving beyond the principles of the world. They discuss as a matter of fact areas currently explored as biofeedback training. As a matter of course, they lead the child to become aware of his or her body and assume personal power over it. For instance, to expand on the example I gave earlier, the child cuts his wrist seriously. The father responds according to the needs of the situation, picks the child up, reaffirms the bond, and gives the safe space. He holds the injured limb, looks the child in the eye, smiles to establish the calm of control, and invites the child to join him in stopping that blood. To the bonded child, the parents are omnipotent and their word is truth. At 8, the child is highly suggestible and cued for survival learning. The parents combine verbal suggestion with imitation by asking the child to join them. The child's brain can make such abstractions if they draw on tangible concreteness, such as the body or the immediate world. Through sparse, terse, concrete language, the father instructs the child in energy direction, suggesting that the blood stop flowing. They mirror the idea to each other, entertaining this possibility. They function as though it is occurring, and form follows function. The conceptual work beneath the awareness follows suit. Just as the Balinese child could, at such a point, walk the fire and not be burned, so this child's brain immediately assimilates the father's instructions and his body accommodates to the operations of mind. The blood loss stops and the wound begins to heal. Again, this is not hypothetical. I am simply reporting. I could add examples from personal experience. What are the possibilities of suggestion to the concrete operational child? The implications stagger the imagination. We draw back and dismiss the potential. Our deeply ingrained pessimism over the human condition forces our surrender to professionalism. I would suggest that you examine current research into biofeedback training to gain a marginal glimpse.
Okay, so over here, stop. Now we have in awareness a lot of biofeedback tools. Although we have not been using it, We can attempt to start using it. You've got the EM wave, you've got the mind mirror, you've got GDV, you've got the blood sample, you've got Veda pulse, you've got life system. So we've got a lot of biofeedback tools in uh, in our repertoire.
Limited facets of body control are heralded as major achievements, as they are indeed for a split system because these applications are attempted years after the stage specific unfolding of such abilities. The magical child would, of course, pick all this up automatically and playfully between the 7th and 14th years, if given education in such avenues to well being. The only limits to the possibilities of concrete operational thinking are set by the parent's own belief system, capacity for creative thought, willingness to leave consensus and to assume responsibility for expanding the criteria for the resulting parent child reality experience. Professionalism and the institution grow out of our fear over reality. Reality criteria. In the case of the injured child, for instance, the average parent would have little capacity for responding to the needs of the situation. She or he would instead react. Conditioned to surrender personal power and ability to the professional, the parent would have to rush the child to a hospital or doctor. Even if she or he knew of the personal possibilities for power in such a situation, fear of social condemnation, if she or he failed, would prove incapacitating and would force him or her to react rather than respond. The child whose parent panics and rushes him or her to the professional, that person who stands between self and personal power, undergoes a deep and abiding learning. She or he learns that the parents do not have the personal power she or he believed them to have. She or he learns that the parents cannot act on his or her behalf, that the matrix is not the safe space, the place of power and possibility, that these must be bought from the professionals. Muscular mindedness grows by finding that when one gestures to the matrix gestures back with a mirroring and enhancing of power and possibility. The parent who panics and shifts responsibility thus dispels the child's own sense of personal power and ability. The child learns that she or he is as important as the parents. The stage is then set for the child's own surrender of responsibility to the professional. Later, as a parent, she or he too will have no choice but to react in panic and throw him or herself on the mercy of the professional at their astonishing prices. His or her child's growth and education will in turn also be in the lack of the power to act. The human body is an infinitely complex interaction of creative forces, all achieving a miraculous homeostasis. Seldom does this balance need conscious attention, but when such attention is needed, the body gives clear signals through a well developed system. Our volitional awareness is then expected to make the necessary adjustments. The decision making part of the hologram must act back on the more automatic parts. Through acculturation and the surrender of competence to the professional, awareness of the body's language and response to it are lost. Then the professional is the only hope left, and of course, she or he capitalizes on our incompetence and works to keep us incompetent, lest she or he should have no return business. So the parents of the magical child educate the youngster in body signals and corresponding responses. An ache or pain is heeded as a fire alarm is. They learn to look for that fire, not to disconnect the bell with drugs. Physician Irving Oil likened chemotherapy as now practiced to speeding down the highway, spotting your oil failure indicator light flashing on, and responding by pulling out a revolver and shooting out that light. As the child grows older, the parents use more verbal instruction for concrete operations. Verbal suggestions for concrete operations within the child's body are effective because the child's language is not yet fully separated from its concrete reference. That is, language is not yet fully abstracted. The child of 7 to 10 or 11 still thinks in actions and acts his or her thinking. Language is still of the body, although the separation of the word and thing is underway. The child is now capable of patterning concrete information through such abstractions and so of operating on the information. In no category is this logic more appropriate than body monitoring and emergency control, particularly during pre-adolescence. The parents capitalize on the magical child's belief in their omnipotence. They encourage his or her innate idea that they have power in their world and that through them she or he can share in this power and develop his or her own. Should the child become ill for some reason, although for the bonded child such unwholeness is rare, the parents assure him or her that they have the personal power to heal. They then devote their full attention to that healing because far more than a temporary body misalignment is involved. Learning is involved. The development of the ability to interact is at stake. Through a continual suggestion, reassurance, and reaffirming of their power and their ability to lend him or her that power, the child's suggestibility receives the idea of healing and the inner work responds. The child learns that mind has dominion over the world. Throughout this period, the parents have continued to encourage, enhance, and respond to the child's primary perceptions. They practice telepathy by using the hypnagogic and anagogic periods right before sleep and on first waking. During these brief periods, they exercise this capacity with their child just as assiduously as a parent might exercise toilet training. They practice remote viewing, encouraging the child to sense particular target areas chosen for the day and to report his or her sensing to them. Through such play, these primary perceptions grow enormously during the stage of suggestibility because the parents are suggesting and entering into specific experiences with the child. Remote viewing. This
Yeah, remote viewing.
Achha.
That is increasing your ability to sense, your ability of perception. Now, if the children are told that you can do it, then they believe they can do it and they can actually do it. We are seeing this after the workshops. So many people have been able to remote view using the one breath technique and the other techniques. So this is what this is talking about.
No, but how do you tell the child to do that?
That's where the practice comes in now. You set a target and then you tell the child that, okay, look for that target. What's in that target? That's the way remote viewing is done.
Yeah, but okay.
So that's what practice is all about.
Learning to transform objects as exhibited by Geller effect or walking fire without harm may have no practical application within ordinary life, but these non-ordinary events do far more than just give possibilities for specific concrete acts of protection. They give enormous confidence in personal power, the power of the mind to flow with the principles of the earth and go beyond the limitations of either.
So this is the basic idea. When we are looking at extrasensory perception, someone was asking the question. I think Mukul Bhabi, your question was, Mukul Bhabi is here.
No, she's not.
No, she's not here. So she was asking, what's the use of OBE, right? Now this is exactly what the use of OBE is. That's a possibility. We can do that. So we are stepping outside the box. We are stepping outside the boundaries of what we are contained in, and truly understanding that we are more than what we are becomes extremely powerful for us.
This is the great learning within concrete operations. Personal power, the muscular mindedness to enter into ever more abstract and complex, unknown, unpredictable situations is always the issue.
See, this is also what theoretical scientists are using to create ideas. Today, Einstein was a theoretical scientist. I keep repeating this, but most of his ideas, he was in an altered state of consciousness when he downloaded that information and then put it down. Physically not able, it was not able to be proved. But later on, after decades, the theorems and the experiments actually got proved. So where was he getting it from? From this extrasensory perception.
Of course, intelligence is not limited to bodily concerns. The child has an insatiable curiosity about everything and desires to interact with a wide spectrum of possibilities.
So
He
see,
loves,
the child is forever curious, and at a certain level, we must indulge that curiosity. Try everything, taste everything, do everything, and create a safe environment in which the child can actually do it. That is what the responsibility of a parent is. And that is where the growth, the neural growth, the intelligence, the stability of the child will take place.
he loves to handle logical learnings of a wide sort. Many exercises in intelligence match his intent. Music is eminently suitable from age 4 on because it is pure body response and action. Its visual symbols are not abstractions or symbols in any sense, but visual signals for muscular response, a sensory motor learning. Learning to read music and learning to read words are worlds apart. They have no points of similarity and involve radically different internal processes. Mathematics and logic of a concrete nature are appropriate after age 7. Art, dance, and all body movements are appropriate as long as they remain play. Should some particular study not match his or her intent, the child will not learn that activity because she or he will not be able to play in it.
So if you're not happy doing something, it will become a pain and not a pleasure. So the child is always going to be better at doing whatever the child is resonating with and wants to do.
The parents know that enforced attendance indicates inappropriate activities and that an increased ability to interact will not take place. The child is given exactly the same freedom of aesthetic response to intellectual samplings that she or he was given of food samplings. The parents know that the child cannot be artificially motivated to learn. They know that she or he is already motivated by the strongest driving force on earth, his or her inner intent. They know that when they take cues from their intent and respond with an appropriate modeling, the child automatically and unhesitatingly follows. Little by little, the child's play on the surface and his or her conceptual work beneath the surface move closer to synergy, which will finally unfold during adolescence in full reversibility thinking. This synergy takes place as the child learns to be selective about what she or he selects from the continuum of possibilities to be given fantasy play reality. His or her use of imagination and fantasy have been free ranging, as they should have been. Now, with the growing rewards and successes from concrete operations, his or her capacity for imagination becomes more devoted to the needs of physical survival and well being in this world. And in this way, outer and inner increasingly mesh. The parents know that their child needs solitude and quiet. Just as they avoid exposing the child to sensory overload, they avoid overloading his or her life with demands.
Okay,
She
so
or
now
he
if a child is, put too much of pressure on, it again creates a problem. You have to have balance between stress and relaxation. There has to be a balance. Otherwise, no learning can take place.
She or he needs long stretches of unfilled time, particularly during the last plateau of his or her learning cycle during the 10th and early 11th years. She or he needs time for mental staring, just as she or he stared for long periods during the early stages, creating empty categories of possibility. To be filled in with full sensory exploration, she or he now stares conceptually, creating empty categories of thought to be filled in with abstract explorations.
So this is what daydreaming is all about. So what this would, what I perceive from this is that allowing the child to daydream is a good thing, basically. But we need to keep stimulating the child to come back from the daydream with new activities.
Thought for thought's sake is beginning to structure within. Regulatory feedback is feeding back on the abstractions made out of the child's operational interactions with the world. When regulatory feedback extracts out of these initial abstractions drawn from concrete concepts, logic is achieving secondary abstraction. This is thinking about thinking. The brain is beginning to function on its own products and processes and to be less dependent on the world. The logic of differentiation is beginning to separate the thought from the action or event. The parents know that between 7 and 9, their child needs interaction with them and with superiors first and interaction with peers second, because intent within must always get its content from without, and only parents and superiors can furnish his or her intent with content at this period. Premature peer interaction indicates a failure of parental bonding and earth bonding. A child bonds to his or her peers only as compensation. Peer bonding cannot lead to development until around age 10, simply because one child's intent cannot furnish another child's intent with content. Intelligence will not grow this way. Peer interaction should unfold during the practice and variation period of the learning cycle, late in the 9th year and during the 10th, and not much before. Then the structured content of each pre-adolescent can find consensus and support in the practice and variation of group play. After age 9, the child's logic of differentiation will begin to separate the word and the thing denoted by that word. Language is moving towards, although it has not become, a separate thought process in the brain. The newborn synchronizes body movement to speech. The 2-year-old moves his hand as he says hand. The 4-year-old coordinates body movements and senses through language. Language is a body movement and acts as a coordinate of the whole system, just as vision does for the senses. The name of a thing enters into the early child's brain pattern for putting information about that thing together, and that name is an integral part of the thing or event, not a description of it or symbol for it. This concreteness of language is a permanent part of the primary process and old brain body knowing. That is the reason the 8 or 9-year-old can be given a verbal suggestion for operating on concrete information. In the concrete concepts of his mind brain, word and thing named are still a unit, and the thing can be changed through the word. Logical feedback is always separating knowledge into more sophisticated categories through feeding back over experience. When separation of word from thing begins in late childhood, this separation does not affect the concrete concepts of the primary process or body knowing. They remain inviolate. The abstraction of language involves the division of labor. Thus, the kind of language to be continually refined and synthesized in logic's feedback will grow completely abstract and no longer related to the concrete language of primary process and old brain. The maturing intelligence will then have or should have these 3 distinctly different but functional language uses at his or her disposal: concrete abstractions from concreteness and pure abstractions. Intent precedes and prepares for the ability to do. A new logical shift is in store at about age 11, a move towards pure abstract thinking. Separating the word from what it names is part of this Separating the word from what it names is part of this moving toward formal thought. Only then should a word be descriptive or stand for that object or event. For the higher logical abilities to develop, language must become separated from concreteness and become a self-enclosed system. This refinement should not, however, be bought at the expense of the concrete language of the body or the language of a primary process. When we force the child to work prematurely with abstract thought, we break up the vital unity of self and world. Writing, Vygotsky explains, virtually enforces a remoteness of reference on the language user. Writing, and to a lesser extent reading, enforces a separation between name and thing named. To deal with this kind of abstraction, the logic of differentiation is forced to skip all preliminary steps and prematurely begin such a separation. The result is an enforced separation between self and world, even though the differentiation required is still clumsy and inadequate. Thus, Firth claims premature literacy stops the development of intelligence cold for 2 to 3 years. The shift of matrix from earth to self and from self as mind brain and body to mind brain alone, as genetically planned, depends upon and demands such a separation between self and world. The separation is the name as that between infant and womb, child and mother, and self system and primary process. The issue is, when should self and world functionally differentiate? Nature provides that this separation take place somewhere around age 10 or 11, when concrete operations have been roughed in and become matters of practice. Premature separation, as brought about by premature literacy, creates the equivalent of a premature birth, a wrenching out of context that creates an isolation and abandonment, which we then rationalize as individuality. Bruner noted that learning to read and write had a huge impact on the brain in the Belgian Congo, forcing them to communicate out of context of their immediate reference. That is, literacy forced the children to separate their sense of self from their actions, thoughts, and world experiences. This is the
So what
same
does it imply
phenomenon.
is, when we force children to learn beyond their capacity and then, be very proud that, see, he's so small, but he can still recite this nursery rhyme. He can do this, he can do that. It actually becomes a big problem.
This means before time also, na?
Hmm.
This is the same phenomenon he observed with the East African Wolof children, whose thought and the object of thought seem to be one until taught to read and write. This leads to a key statement and the crux of this issue. School seems to promote the self-consciousness born of a distinction between human processes and physical phenomena. And indeed it does. But is this what we want in the years from 7 to 11? When such premature separation breaks up the functional unity between individual and world system and limits concrete operational thinking. The issue rests on biological functions within the brain. The late child's conceptual system consists of patterns of sensory organization formed through his actual sensory interaction during his developmental years. The written word is made of infinitely variable symbol letters that can be arranged in groups to stand for symbols, which stand for words, which must then stand for things or events. The actual pattern in the brain includes the word as an integral part of the thing or event, the way by which word can act as a coordinate between mind, brain, and body, and as a coordinate between brain and earth system. This gestalt must be artificially and arbitrarily broken up for literacy learning at age 6 or 7. The word portion of the unified conceptual pattern must be wrenched out of context and treated as an isolated entity, and 3 different levels of abstraction of that concreteness must be performed. Because the brain operates as a unit, this differentiation acts on all the computer brain's concepts, including the self-system sense of awareness in the world system, leading to the sense of alienation, isolation, and psychological abandonment that contribute to formation of the concept of death at around age 9.
Okay, so we are going to have one talk by one lady from Delhi, and she's mentioned prenatal consciousness. I think this is what she's talking about. Going to talk about. I don't know. We'll have to see.
When do we want to promote the self-consciousness born of a distinction between human processes and physical phenomena? Surely not at age 7 or 8, just when the new self is emerging in a functional relationship with the primary process. That innate and intuitive connection is nothing less than our bonding to the earth, which is literally our umbilical cord through which our nourishment and substance must come at this critical stage. The matrix shift at age 11 is the appropriate time for these distinctions. Thus, the parents of the magical child avoid premature or enforced separation of word from thing and the resulting separation of self and world. They delay literacy until age 11. The child system maintains its one-for-one correspondence between thing and name in order that she or he might learn to operate on that information when necessary and change it as needed for physical well-being. Around age 9, the 2 rich years of operational thinking and some 4 to 5 years of continual enhancement of primary perceptions, bonding him or her with the earth matrix, the magical child moves towards autonomy. Through logical maturation, she or he becomes aware that his or her body is vulnerable and that the parent's assumption of his or her well being has limits. She or he longs to assume responsibility for his or her survival. With a background of survival learning and practice and with bondings with the earth, she or he has confidence in his or her own ability to respond to life. His or her response is the excitement of adventure. Just as a person with a new game or skill desires to test that skill under fire, so the magical child desires confrontations with his or her own survival. Logical maturation brings awareness of death as a possibility in every unfolding moment, but this knowledge adds zest to living. The stress of the unknown, unpredictable, is an exciting challenge rather than a source of anxiety and dread. Awareness of death acts as the catalyst on all the child's knowledge, fills in the details of his or her roughed-in survival ability, and brings alertness to his or her acts. Death gives meaning, purpose, and design to his or her survival skills. Child play becomes the deep play of late pre-adolescence and adolescence. Play in which the young person is aware of how high the stakes are and so desires to increase his or her skills and up to the ante. Muscular mindedness, then, is the ability to accept a knowledge of death without anxiety and so be strengthened rather than weakened by it. Surely the child will know fear, and she or he will have been educated to have a healthy respect for that fear. She or he will learn to heed and use fear as ongoing learning because fear is the body's signal for alertness. Fear has an object and gives a point for concentration, a focus for applying survival skills. Anxiety has no concrete object and so cannot organize the system into focus. Anxiety divides the intent against itself and weakens survival ability. The anxiety-ridden system reacts to the unfolding event, trying to use the ability to interact as a buffer between self and some potential harm. Anxiety does not evaluate the situation as the chance to exercise the ability to interact. It screens the actual information from the event through a preset criteria based on reaction. During a pre-adolescence, the child longs for adventure and excitement. His or her muscular mindedness for coping with high stress needs exercise, just as any other act does. Peer group or social orientation becomes increasingly appropriate. There is a high accident rate among children between age 10 or so and later adolescence before the age of the automobile. Young people in this age bracket will compulsively take extraordinary risks. The pre-adolescent is impelled to confront danger just as she or he was earlier impelled to interact with his or her world with all his or her senses. The tragedy is, of course, that the cultural child is given no tools for this encounter, yet his or her biological plan unfolds the intent on schedule. just as though she or he has been actually educated. I remember this so well from my own pre adolescence. We were driven to risks without rhyme or reason. We had a game called Back Out, a form of follow the leader, and the biggest, bravest, most athletic boy, Wendy, was always leader. He would suddenly jump up, shout, back out, and rush off into harrowing feats, with the rest of us flying after him with equal dread and thrill. We dreaded being incapable of keeping up or backing out through fear. Scaling the cliffs at Flag Rock, up the old school building's fire escape to the fourth floor, inching our way around the crumbling cornice, leaping from the peak of the barn, crawling between the coal cars, jolting about as a train was made up, rushing down through the unknown terrace neighborhood where homes were built on a steeply pitched hillside, a hedge coming up, the leader hurdling it with a magnificent leap only to disappear silently, and each of us, unable to break stride or because such a leap was impossible, rushing pell-mell toward that moment, secretly weeping and wetting our breeches, the leap up over a long 15-foot drop onto a steep slant, each tumbling out of the way of the next hurtling. White-faced body, shaken breath knocked out, gasping but instantly up and running blindly on. Competitiveness? No, it was our inner drive impelling us into confrontations we did not understand, an intent without content. And then, Wendy's great dive from a limb higher than anyone had ever dared before into the rock encircled swimming hole, missed by a mere 6 inches or so, and our long haul of his body head lolling strangely back to town where help could not help. We were impelled by our intent to test ourselves, yet had no notion of how to go about it, no understanding of what impelled us or what might be appropriate to our needs. We had to furnish ourselves with peer constructed content, and our notions of content were crude. Dares, daunts, and cruelties could not substitute for the education that had been sorely neglected. Instead of survival techniques, we had only our culture's anxieties, and our bravado and daring proved poor substitutes against the ironclad principles of a world we did not understand. In the years from 9 to 11, the period of practicing operations on concrete knowledge, the magical child has a wealth of experience in abstracting out of concreteness. His or her parents assume an increasingly peripheral supportive role. They know the child must learn autonomy by practicing it. They have equipped him or her with all the techniques for survival available to them and have guided his or her introduction into thinking about thinking. They will have another critical period of modeling and guidance, but they know she or he is rapidly moving towards becoming his or her own matrix. They stand behind him or her with physical support. Their bonding is unbroken and unquestioned. By the child's 11th or 12th year, however, their job is nearing completion, and they prepare to retire to more invisible supporting roles with grace. Before long, even that support will not be needed. Having had their own greatest learning through being the teachers, the parents are then ready to shift into other modes themselves. The child's intelligence at 11 is some two-thirds developed. She or he has a knowledge of his or her world, she or he relates creatively with it, and she or he survives within it. She or he has the personal power and freedom from anxiety, imagination, and creativity. Yet everything taking place in these first years has been preparatory to the great possibility unfolding in formal operational thinking. This is the journey into the mind, the creation of realities, the point at which the logical structuring beneath the surface merges fully with the play in awareness.
Okay, anyone, anything? Clear. Brilliant. Let's move on.
Thinking about thinking, formal operations. During World War II, the US Army set up air bases in Alaska. Time and again, mechanics reported that they would be frustrated by some engine fault, only to have some ignorant Eskimo handyman amble up, peer over their shoulder, smilingly reach over into the bowels of the engine, tinker with some gadget, and repair the machine. Apparently, this was similar to those so-called idiot savants who cannot read or write but can do astonishing mathematical computations in their heads without knowing how. The Eskimo seemed to follow the dictates of his primary processing, allowing his body to move appropriately in much the same way as Utek sensed the location of the caribou, the direction of the weather, and the natural flow. But his ability to open to primary perceptions and move accordingly with the machine was not then reversible. That is, he could not stand outside his own actions, analyze them, and come to an understanding of the machine or of machinery in general. Uncanny as his talent was, in itself, it would probably never lead to the pure inventiveness to build that machine. The Balinese child, or the Ceylonese, who can entertain the possibility of fire not burning as an equally valid state, returns to the point from which the operation of mind began. But this is a return of purely concrete terms, a return to the earth matrix as it is. These people cannot retrace their steps, analyze them, and come to an understanding of what their body knowing has accomplished. Thus, they never learn to take their miraculous ability and apply it freely to other activities. Somewhere around age 11, the brain undergoes another growth spurt. At the same time, another logical shift takes place, giving new ways of processing information. Susceptibility to suggestion hits its peak, from which it will slowly phase out as one of the characteristics of the mind brain by about age 15. Formal operational thinking, the ability of the mind to operate on and change information its own brain, unfolds for development. As usual, it is only an intent within and must receive its initial impetus from outside sources. But this dependency on modeling will fade as the new ability develops. The thrust of the biological plan during this period is for the mind brain to become its own source of possibility. At age 9, the child could learn a concrete operation by model or instruction, but she or he could not correlate what she or he had learned. By 9, she or he has the ability to operate on his or her incoming information and change it according to an idea she or he has grasped. That is, discovering that the liquid is a fat, short flask does not become more liquid when poured into a tall, thin flask. Heretofore, tall and thin meant bigger and more in the child's taut-statured world. But suddenly, operational thinking grasps the notion of conservation, and the amount of liquid is constant regardless of the shape of the flask it is poured into. She or he will have to go through the same steps of discovery in other problems of conservation, such as being shown a small figure of modeling clay, then rolling the figure out flat, making a very large figure, and being asked which one has the most clay. Until some logical maturation has occurred, she or he will not correlate the discovery of the liquid with the problem of the clay. At some point of logical maturity, she or he reverses his or her steps and realizes more than just a single fact of conservation by realizing the overall law of conservation. She or he can then correlate and apply the principles of one discovery over a wide range of roughly similar problems. When the child first discovers that the liquid remains constant, she or he has abstracted from the concrete knowledge gained in his or her earlier years. This can be called a first level abstraction, one arising directly out of practical intelligence. It is based on a concrete pattern for putting together actual sensory information. But then, in the further refinement of logic, when the child grasps the principle of conservation and realizes that it applies universally, she or he has grasped or created in the brain an abstraction of that first level abstraction. At that point, thinking is operating on itself. The child is thinking about thinking, whether she or he is aware of it or not. This grasp of the principle involved is a second level abstraction. During the years from 7 to 11, a body of first level abstractions should have formed. The variety of appropriate concrete abstractions has been detailed. The logic of concrete logic, arithmetic, operations on the physical body, such as stopping a wound from bleeding or stopping pain, the various Geller effects and cause effect reversals. All this activity creates a first level abstract body of knowledge that logical feedback will start feeding back on once it has been roughed in and becomes functional, synthesizing and making categories of these preliminary forms of abstraction. By age 11, with a shift of logic and a brain growth spurt, logic will have a critical mass of first level abstractions, offering a wide continuum of points, similarity for second level abstractions, which are pure ideas that do not have to be related directly to concreteness. This is formal operational thinking. Through formal operations, the mind can experience information and perceptions from its own creative thought alone. Out of its vast pool of knowledge, the brain can then create its own stimuli and experience perceptions from its own abstract conceptions. Thus, suggestibility will eventually be phased out as a needed tool. The magical child's perceptual experience will then have a wide source of possibility relating to the earth as it is, a matrix of stable background that is experienced every day. Creating, relating with what earth through concrete operations of mind, giving possibilities beyond the earth's own principles of cause and effect, relating with the possibilities of pure thinking, imagination, abstract conceptual constructions, and the resulting perceptual experience, not found in any concreteness or operation of or on concreteness, which means a reality created entirely within, and mixtures of these three ways of processing and or creating information. To this last category must be added the possibilities of one person creating abstract perceptual experience and sharing it with another person or persons, and the interactions between them in creating consensus realities. Formal operations depend on objectivity. For these, you must be able to stand outside yourself and observe your own actions. Thought must be able to separate from what is thought about. This is the objectivity lacking in the East African children until those children were taught to read and write. Separating self from world is one of the prerequisites for separating thought from what is thought about, which in turn depends on separating the word from the object or event named by that word. All this differentiation has been part of regulatory feedback's job in late childhood and early pre-adolescence and remains its job until the person reaches 15 or so. Nature provides for this gradual detachment so that concrete operations might be learned, perfected, and turned over to more autonomic processes in the old brain as part of the whole substrata of automatic information processing.
Okay, I think we'll stop here. Anyone saying anything?
Everybody switch on your camera so that we can see you.
हमको देखेगी. Hi.
Ram Ram.
Hi.
Hi. मेरा वीडियो नहीं आ रहा है.
Some people aren't switching their cameras anyway. Chaliye, I think it's pretty clear.
Must have not had a bath.
Huh?
वो लोग नहाए नहीं होंगे इसीलिए नहीं ऑन कर रहे
ऐसा
कैमरा.
क्या?
That's good.
No, we're not dressed up for a video.
How does it matter? We all know you. We are looking at your expanded self, not your just here wala self.
Who is not dressed up as saying?
Sudha.
Sudha.
I recognize the voice.
Okay.
Sudha, we don't mind your dress, don't worry.
Still not choosing to.
Hey, where's my this thing then?
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you, Shimangla.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.
Thank
See you all at 4 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.
4 o'clock. Ram Ram.
Ram Ram.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Rahul, how did you connect with us?
सर व्हाट्सएप पे आपको मैसेज किया था ना मुझे.
अच्छा. ठीक है नहीं. How did you get to know about us?
सर एक्चुअली आई एम रिसर्चिंग ऑन ब्रेन एंटरटेनमेंट.
In brainwave entertainment. Okay.
Hi.
Oh, you just messaged me. Okay. Yeah, so Hemi Singh does entrain the brain. Are you
Okay.
training the meditation today at 4 o'clock?
Yeah, sure. Sir, I have some doubts. I have some questions about brain entertainment.
Tell me if I can help you.
Sir, I am on antidepressant.
Yes.
So after being on that medicine, I am not getting any effect of brain entertainment. So it is due to medications. This is happening.
What? Please repeat what you said.
I am on antidepressant.
Okay.
After being on the tablets,
Yes.
I'm not getting effects of that sound therapy on me.
You're not taking the effect.
I'm not getting effect
You're
after
not
being on that.
Have you
after
tried
being-
Have you tried HemiSync?
I used to make through some my own personal software.
No. See what happens is if you are going to make the binaural beats on yourself, then you're going to make a single binaural beat.
Okay.
I think what happens is there's multi-layered binaural beat. And one track can have up to 35 binaural beats playing at the same time.
Okay.
So the effect is totally different. You try the meditation today and then we'll see.
So brain entertainment में भी classes होगी क्या?
This happens automatically.
Okay.
We have equipment, it's called the mind mirror, where you take feeds from the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe and actually see the brainwave patterns on screen. We are going to have a talk on that also.
Okay.
The person who's really using the machine and teaching people how to use it, she's going to be coming on.
Okay. Thank you.
Judith Pennington, you can Google Mind Mirror if you want.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So hang on, we've got a lot of talks coming on. Please join. Just now we are doing everything on the house. So
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So join the sessions. You've got the list, right? I sent you the list.
Yeah, I got.
Yeah. Just join the sessions. Where are you from? Rahul?
Jodhpur.
From Jodhpur. Okay. Yeah. You mentioned that. Okay. Chalo, we'll see you at 4 o'clock.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Ram Ram.